What if I told you that the secret to becoming the best version of yourself isn't some magical formula? It's hidden in the pages of books you could be reading right now. Imagine if you could rewire your brain, break free from old habits, and start living with more purpose and focus, all by simply reading the right books. Sounds too good to be true? Well, stick around, because today we're diving into the best self-improvement books that have the power to completely change how you think, how you live, and who you become. Ready to transform your life? Let's get started. Book 1, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. Have you ever stopped to really think about where your mind is at this very moment? I know it sounds like a simple question, but it's actually a powerful one. Most of us are constantly stuck in the past or worrying about the future, so much that we forget about now, the only time that truly exists. This is where Eckhart Tolle's groundbreaking book, The Power of Now, comes into play. This isn't just another self-help book. It's a transformative guide to understanding the importance of being present. Tolle talks about something that's central not just to modern well-being practices, but to ancient spiritual teachings, including Buddhism, that our minds are constantly drifting away from the present moment. You might be asking, why is living in the present so important? What makes it so special? Well, let's dive into that. When we focus on the present, our brains aren't overloaded with worries about the past or future. We stop stressing over what went wrong yesterday or what might go wrong tomorrow. This, according to neuroscience, reduces the activation of our fight or flight system, which is responsible for much of our anxiety. In simple terms, being in the present helps calm the mind, which leads to a healthier brain. In The Power of Now, Tolle speaks about how the mind is constantly influenced by thoughts that aren't necessarily real or helpful. They're just mental constructs about the past or projections about the future. And here's where it gets really interesting. Our thoughts can create an entire reality that's separate from the actual reality. This concept is deeply connected to Buddhist philosophy, especially the teachings on suffering, dukkha. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from our attachment to things, our expectations and desires. We get stuck on how things should be, forgetting that everything is impermanent. The same thing happens with our thoughts. When we identify with them, we forget the present moment and create unnecessary suffering in our minds. And guess what? Neuroscience agrees. When we ruminate too much on the past or future, we activate brain regions tied to stress and anxiety. Now, this all leads us to the crucial idea that the now is the only place where we can find peace and clarity. And surprisingly, this idea has been backed by science. The act of focusing on the present moment has been shown to activate brain regions related to pleasure, reward, and calm. When we stay present, the brain functions in a more relaxed, peaceful state. It's pretty fascinating how both Tolle's teachings and modern neuroscience align on this. But how do we apply this in our everyday lives? How can we stop living in the past or future and start focusing on the present? The answer is simple: through the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is all about bringing your attention to the present moment without judgment. It's a practice that's central to Buddhism, but it's also gaining huge traction in the world of neuroscience. When you practice mindfulness, you train your brain to be more aware of what's happening right now, instead of getting lost in the endless cycle of thoughts and worries. And the cool part, this rewires the brain for peace and clarity. Tolle and Buddhism both agree that when we stop clinging to our thoughts and start being fully present, we can experience freedom. The Buddha called this freedom nirvana, where suffering ceases because we let go of our attachments. Tolle is essentially saying the same thing in The Power of Now. True freedom comes when we stop clinging to the past or future and fully embrace the present moment. So as you begin to explore The Power of Now, remember that this book is not just a spiritual guide. It's a manual for transforming your mind. It's about realizing that peace isn't something we have to chase. It's already available to us, right here, right now. In conclusion, The Power of Now is much more than just a spiritual text. It's a brain training guide. By focusing on the present, we stop the mental chatter that causes so much stress and suffering. Both Buddhism and modern neuroscience tell us that living in the present moment can literally change the way our brain functions, leading to greater peace, joy, and clarity. Next, we'll dive deeper into how mindfulness meditation can literally rewire your brain to make these teachings a daily part of your life. Ready to see how this practice can transform your brain and experience? Let's go. Before we dive deeper into the next book, I just want to let you know that I've left a link in the description below with all 5 books on Amazon. If you're interested in grabbing any of them for yourself, using our link not only helps support the channel, but also ensures we can keep bringing you more valuable content. No extra cost for you, just a way for you to help us keep growing. So if you decide to make a purchase, we truly appreciate it. Now let's keep going with the next book. Book 2, The Art of Happiness, Dalai Lama. When was the last time you thought about what it truly means to be happy? We often chase after success, possessions, or status in the hope that they will bring us happiness. But what if happiness wasn't something you could chase at all? What if it was something you could cultivate from within, regardless of the external world? This is where The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama comes into play. Now, this isn't just another be happy kind of book. The Dalai Lama takes a deep dive into understanding what happiness really means from a Buddhist perspective. And here's where things get interesting. His teachings don't just come from ancient wisdom, but are also backed by modern psychology and neuroscience. The Dalai Lama, like the Buddha, teaches that happiness is not an external pursuit, but an inner state. It's a state of mind that can be cultivated through specific practices and through how we relate to the world. But this idea is not just philosophical, it has actual scientific backing. Neuroscientific studies have shown that our brains are wired to experience positive emotions, but that we can reprogram them to do so more often by training our minds. Let's break this down. One of the most profound teachings in The Art of Happiness is about the nature of suffering. The Dalai Lama doesn't ignore the pain and hardship in life. In fact, he acknowledges that suffering is a part of being human. But here's the twist. He teaches that our response to suffering and how we perceive it has the power to influence whether or not we experience true happiness. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering, dukkha, is seen as an inevitable part of life. The key to happiness, however, is how we respond to it. And this response is where mindfulness, meditation, and a compassionate mindset come into play. The Dalai Lama emphasizes the importance of compassion, not just towards others, but towards ourselves. It's the foundation for overcoming the suffering that we encounter. Now let's talk about the science for a second. In recent years, scientists have started to confirm what the Dalai Lama has been saying for centuries. Studies on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt, have shown that our brains can be reshaped by our thoughts and experiences. When we practice compassion, kindness, and mindfulness, our brains become more attuned to these positive states. In fact, research has found that practices like loving kindness meditation can increase activity in the brain's prefrontal cortex, the area associated with positive emotions, empathy, and social connection. But the Dalai Lama doesn't just focus on feeling happy. He encourages a holistic approach to happiness. For him, true happiness comes from aligning our minds with our actions. It's not just about having happy thoughts. It's about living with purpose, kindness, and love in everything we do. The concept of equanimity in Buddhism comes into play here. Equanimity is about maintaining mental calmness, balance, and peace, regardless of life's ups and downs. And studies show that practicing equanimity can lead to reduced levels of stress and greater overall well-being. One of the Dalai Lama's main points is that happiness is a skill. It's something we can learn to cultivate. And just like any skill, it requires practice. But here's the cool part. As you practice happiness, your brain actually gets better at it. The more you focus on gratitude, kindness, and compassion, the more your brain becomes wired to experience these positive emotions. Now, I know this might sound like a lot to take in, but remember, it's all connected. The Dalai Lama's teachings on happiness aren't just abstract ideas. They are deeply practical and supported by the latest research in psychology and neuroscience. And that's what makes this book so powerful. It's about combining ancient wisdom with modern science to help us live fuller, happier lives. In conclusion, The Art of Happiness is more than just a book about feeling good. It's a roadmap for how we can cultivate a lasting inner happiness that is independent of the outside world. By embracing practices like mindfulness, meditation, and compassion, we can rewire our brains to experience more positive emotions and lead more fulfilling lives. In the next section, we'll dive into the practical application of these teachings, how to integrate compassion and mindfulness into your daily routine. Ready to learn how to start training your brain for lasting happiness? Let's go. Book 3, Emotional Intelligence. Daniel Goleman. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you heard someone say, "You're really good at managing your emotions"? Or maybe someone said, "Wow, you're great at understanding other people's feelings." These aren't just compliments. They're what we call emotional intelligence, or EI for short. And believe it or not, it can be a bigger predictor of success than your IQ. This is the central idea behind Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence, a groundbreaking book that introduced the world to the power of managing emotions and understanding the emotions of others. But here's the thing, emotional intelligence is not just some nice-to-have skill. It's a game changer for your personal growth, mental health, relationships, and yes, even your brain's well-being. Goleman's book doesn't just highlight how important emotional intelligence is in our daily lives. It shows how it's deeply connected to brain function and how we can actively improve it. And when we start improving our EI, we start rewiring our brains in some pretty powerful ways. But what exactly is emotional intelligence, and why should we care? At its core, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, while also being aware of and influencing the emotions of others. This is where neuroscience really gets involved. For example, when we become aware of our emotions, we activate the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center. This part of the brain helps us control impulsive reactions and make more thoughtful, balanced decisions. Now, let's look at how emotional intelligence breaks down. According to Goleman, there are 5 key components. Self-awareness, recognizing and understanding our own emotions and their effect on our thoughts and behavior. Self-awareness allows us to tune into our feelings, helping us understand what we're truly experiencing. Self-regulation, the ability to control or redirect disruptive emotions and impulses. This is the cooling system of the brain. If you've ever gotten angry and managed to stay calm in a heated situation, that's self-regulation in action. Motivation, the passion to work for long-term goals with persistence and resilience. This is the part of your brain that gets you to wake up in the morning and stay driven, even when obstacles come your way. Empathy, understanding the emotional makeup of other people. Empathy is about sensing other people's emotions, which makes us better communicators and helps us build stronger, more supportive relationships. Social skills, managing relationships to move people in desired directions. This component is what helps us build and maintain strong, positive relationships, whether in our personal lives or at work. So, you might be thinking, okay, sounds great. But what does all this have to do with my brain? Well, let me explain. When we practice emotional intelligence, our brains change. Yes, you heard that right. Neuroscientists have found that emotional regulation practices like mindfulness, meditation, or even self-reflection can actually reshape the neural pathways in the brain. This means that as we improve our emotional awareness and control, we are literally rewiring our brains for greater emotional well-being. And the science backs it up. Studies show that people with high emotional intelligence have more robust mental health, are better at managing stress, and are more successful in relationships and careers. But what's even more fascinating is that emotional intelligence isn't fixed. It's a skill that we can develop with practice. Just like any muscle, the more we train our emotional muscles, the stronger they get. Now, here's where the Buddhist connection comes in. One of the core teachings of Buddhism is the practice of mindful awareness. Mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment without judgment, is deeply connected to emotional intelligence. When we practice mindfulness, we become more aware of our emotions as they arise. This allows us to respond skillfully rather than react impulsively. Buddhist teachings also emphasize compassion and understanding of others, which directly align with the empathy and social skills components of emotional intelligence. By cultivating mindfulness and compassion, we can learn to manage our emotions and understand others on a deeper level, creating healthier, more harmonious relationships. It's all connected. By developing emotional intelligence, we're not just improving our ability to deal with our own emotions. We're enhancing our connection to the world around us, both scientifically and spiritually. Goleman's insights into emotional intelligence show us that by mastering these skills, we can make our minds more resilient, compassionate, and ultimately happier. In conclusion, emotional intelligence teaches us that emotions are not something to be ignored or feared. Instead, they are powerful tools for understanding ourselves and others. Through the practice of emotional awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and mindfulness, we can actually rewire our brains to improve our emotional well-being. As we continue this journey, we'll explore how to apply the principles of emotional intelligence in our daily lives. Ready to start building stronger emotional awareness? Let's dive in. Book 4, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg. How many times have you said to yourself, "I want to change, but I just can't seem to stick to it"? Whether it's eating healthier, exercising more, or breaking a bad habit, we all know how hard it can be to make lasting changes in our lives. But here's the thing. It's not that we don't have the willpower, it's that we don't understand how habits are formed and how they can be broken. This is where Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, comes in. The core message of this book is simple but powerful. Our habits shape our lives more than we realize. And the best part, once we understand how habits work, we can change them scientifically. Duhigg breaks down the science of habits into 3 core components: the cue, the routine, and the reward. This is called the habit loop. Understanding this loop is the key to transforming bad habits into good ones, or even replacing them with new behaviors. The first step in breaking or changing a habit is identifying the cue. This is the trigger that gets the habit loop started. It could be something external, like seeing a particular place or person, or something internal, like a feeling of stress or boredom. The cue is the starting point of the loop, and it's often the most overlooked part of our habits. Once we become aware of it, we can start to make conscious decisions about how we respond to it. The second component of the habit loop is the routine. This is the behavior or action that we automatically take when the cue happens. For example, you might reach for your phone when you feel stressed. Cue. Check social media, routine, and then feel a temporary sense of relief, reward. The routine is where habits become ingrained, often without us even realizing it. But here's the trick. We can change the routine by choosing a different response to the cue. The third component is the reward. This is the feeling or benefit we get from completing the routine. The reward is what reinforces the habit, making us want to do it again. It could be a physical pleasure, like the taste of food or the rush from exercising, or it could be emotional, like the sense of relief or accomplishment we get from checking off a task. Understanding the reward is crucial because it's what keeps us hooked on a habit. But here's where the neuroscience really comes into play. Research shows that when we repeat a behavior over and over, our brain forms new neural pathways that make the habit easier to repeat in the future. Essentially, we're wiring our brains to continue that behavior. The more we repeat a habit, the stronger these neural pathways become, and the more automatic the behavior becomes. But don't worry. Neuroscience also tells us that our brains are flexible. This is known as neuroplasticity. It means that we have the power to reshape our brains, to form new pathways, and to change old habits. The key to changing habits is to interrupt the habit loop. Identify the cue, change the routine, and ensure that the new routine provides a satisfying reward. Over time, the brain will rewire itself to favor the new behavior. Now let's bring in the Buddhist perspective. One of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism is the concept of impermanence, the idea that everything changes. Habits, just like everything else in life, are not permanent. But the mind gets stuck in old patterns, clinging to familiar ways of thinking and behaving. Buddhism teaches that we can break free from these patterns by cultivating mindfulness and awareness. By observing our habits with a non-judgmental mindset, we can start to notice the cues, routines, and rewards that shape our behaviors, and slowly start to change them. In fact, mindfulness and meditation are powerful tools for changing habits. When we meditate, we develop awareness of our thoughts and actions, and we begin to break the automatic, reactive patterns that drive our behavior. Over time, mindfulness helps us become more present and intentional, allowing us to make better choices and create new, positive habits. Duhigg's book and Buddhist teachings both emphasize the importance of awareness and mindfulness when it comes to creating lasting change. It's not enough to just want to change. We need to become aware of the patterns in our lives and consciously choose to replace them with healthier, more intentional habits. In conclusion, the power of habit shows us that habits aren't just mindless routines. They are deeply ingrained behaviors that shape our lives, both consciously and unconsciously. By understanding the habit loop, we can start to change our behaviors and, with time, rewire our brains for better habits. As we continue, we'll explore practical ways to apply these habit-breaking techniques in our everyday lives. Ready to learn how to break free from your own habits and start creating the life you want? Let's dive in. Book 5. Atomic Habits. James Clear. Ever tried to change something in your life by making a big, dramatic shift, only to fall back into old habits after a few weeks? If so, you're not alone. The truth is, change isn't about making massive, sweeping changes overnight. It's about small improvements that compound over time. And that's exactly the premise of James Clear's Atomic Habits. The idea that small habits, when repeated consistently, can lead to massive transformations. Clear breaks down the science of habit formation into a simple yet powerful framework, the 4 laws of behavior change. These laws are designed to make building good habits easy and breaking bad habits much harder. But the key message: you don't need to overhaul your entire life in one go. Instead, focus on making tiny changes, what he calls atomic habits, that will have a huge impact over time. The first law of behavior change is make it obvious. The more visible and clear the habit cue is, the more likely you are to notice it and act on it. For example, if you want to develop the habit of drinking more water, start by putting a glass of water on your desk, where you'll see it. The easier it is to remember to do, the more likely you'll do it. The second law is make it attractive. This is where the reward part of the habit loop comes in. Clear explains that our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, so we're more likely to stick with habits that feel good. If you want to start exercising more, for instance, find an activity you actually enjoy. By making the habit attractive, you make it much easier to stick to. The third law is, make it easy. One of the biggest barriers to habit change is complexity. If a new habit feels too difficult or overwhelming, we're likely to give up. The key here is to reduce friction. Make the habit as easy as possible to do. For instance, if you want to read more, start by reading just a page a day. As your momentum builds, you'll naturally start reading more. The fourth and final law is, make it satisfying. Clear emphasizes that the more satisfying a habit feels in the moment, the more likely we are to repeat it. This is where you can leverage the reward part of the habit loop. For example, after a workout, give yourself a little reward, whether it's a post-workout smoothie or a relaxing bath. The key is to feel good about completing the habit, reinforcing the behavior. Now let's talk about why these small habits are so powerful. At first glance, making small changes like drinking an extra glass of water or reading a page a day might not seem like a big deal. But here's the science. These tiny habits start to compound. What seems insignificant at first, when repeated consistently, can lead to massive changes over time. This is where the idea of compound growth comes in. Think about it. If you improve by just 1% every day, in a year, you'll be 37 times better at the habit than when you started. This idea is at the heart of atomic habits. Small changes that you repeat daily have a cumulative effect. And because of how the brain works, once a habit becomes ingrained, it becomes automatic, no willpower needed. And here's the exciting part. These small habits don't just work for building good habits, they're also crucial for breaking bad ones. The idea is to invert the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying. For example, if you're trying to quit eating junk food, you could make it invisible by not keeping any in your house. If you're trying to break a bad habit, the trick is to remove the cues, make it harder to do, and make the negative behavior feel less rewarding. The science behind habit formation is fascinating, but it's also incredibly empowering. Through the process of neuroplasticity, our brains can be rewired over time. By repeating small habits, we create new neural pathways that make these behaviors automatic. Essentially, we're rewiring our brains, creating a new identity and a new set of behaviors that will last for life. So, how does this connect to Buddhism? Well, Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of mindfulness and awareness in everyday actions. By being mindful of our habits, whether positive or negative, we can start to shift our behavior in a conscious way. Buddhism teaches that by cultivating awareness, we can break free from our habitual patterns and create more intentional, purposeful lives. In fact, one of the most powerful aspects of atomic habits is the idea of identity-based habits. Clear argues that to make lasting change, we need to focus on who we want to become, not just what we want to achieve. For example, instead of saying, "I want to run a marathon," ask yourself, what kind of person do I need to be to run a marathon? The answer could be, I am the kind of person who runs regularly. This small shift in mindset can make a world of difference in how we approach our goals, and it aligns beautifully with Buddhist principles of living intentionally and cultivating a mindful path. In conclusion, Atomic Habits offers a powerful framework for making lasting changes in our lives by focusing on small, incremental improvements. The 4 laws of behavior change, make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, can help you create new habits and break old ones. And by using the science of habit formation, we can literally rewire our brains to make good habits automatic. Next, we'll dive into practical strategies for implementing these ideas in your everyday life. Ready to start making small changes that lead to big transformations? Let's jump in. As we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned from these incredible books. Whether it's Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, James Clear's Atomic Habits, or The Science Behind Meditation, all these powerful resources have one thing in common. They invite us to change, but not in some grand, unattainable way. No, they offer a more accessible path, a way to transform ourselves step by small, conscious step toward becoming the person we want to be. At the heart of all of these teachings is the realization that you have the power to change your life. It's not about achieving perfection or about making giant leaps. It's about being mindful of the small habits, thoughts, and behaviors you repeat every day, because those little moments, they add up. And here's the key takeaway: don't underestimate the power of small changes. Just like a tiny pebble tossed into a pond creates ripples that spread farther than you can see, your daily habits, no matter how small they seem, have the power to create massive shifts in your life. But this only happens if you keep at it. If you show up, even when it feels hard, even when you don't see immediate results. You might be thinking, but how do I start? How do I begin making these changes? Well, the answer is simpler than you think. Start with one thing, one habit, one practice, and build on it. Start small. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, just like James Clear teaches. And like Buddhism suggests, bring mindfulness into every action. Start observing your thoughts and your reactions, and over time, you'll notice those small changes beginning to stick. For instance, if you want to practice mindfulness, begin with just 5 minutes of meditation a day. Just 5 minutes. That's it. It's easy. And over time, you'll find that your awareness deepens, your mind quiets, and you start to live more fully in the present moment. If you want to break a bad habit, like reaching for your phone first thing in the morning, try swapping it for something that serves you better, like drinking a glass of water or writing down one thing you're grateful for. These small shifts will add up, and slowly you'll notice a new you emerging, someone more mindful, more focused, and more aligned with your highest potential. Remember, this journey is not about instant success. It's about consistent effort and the power of building the right habits day after day. Just as the Buddha teaches that life is a continuous journey toward enlightenment, your path toward personal growth is an ongoing process. Embrace it. Let go of perfection. Be kind to yourself when things don't go as planned. This process is messy, but it's your process, and that's the most important thing. So, whether you're trying to find peace in the present moment or you're looking to create new habits that stick, just take one step at a time. The books we've talked about today offer profound wisdom to guide you. But remember, the real work happens in the doing. The real power is in the everyday actions you take. And it's all in your hands. Now, what's one small step you can take today to move forward? Think about it, commit to it, and make it happen. Your future self will thank you for it.